Morning, and welcome to our roundtable on the amazing decade, right? Or when students changed the mission of CLA. And this again is part of the ongoing 150th anniversary observances about the College of Liberal Arts, and we're very glad indeed to be here with you this morning. And I am particularly pleased to be able to introduce and moderate the discussion here with a panel of extraordinary people, some of whom I'm certain are familiar to many of you already, and others you'll be introduced to for the first time. But we're looking forward to a wonderful session. Again, I'm going to introduce each of them, and also, in this context, to help give you some sense about one of the moving forces in the amazing decade on this campus in the 1960s and early 1970s, the Morrill Hall, the 1969 Morrill Hall takeover. We're going to screen a front portion, about 17 minutes, of a student-made documentary called Standing on the Shoulders of Giants that was produced in 2009 in conjunction with the 40th anniversary of the Morrill Hall takeover, that it was put together by members of the Afro-American Action Committee. We're going to screen a front end of that documentary, which includes interviews and exchanges, again, with some of the principals, including Professor Mahmoud El-Kati, who's here, and myself, and perhaps most notably, Rosemary Freeman Massey, who, again, was one of the central leaders of the AAAC group during those years, and who unfortunately passed away last week in Milwaukee. So we'll get a chance to see Rosemary live. I'm going to say a few words about her also, and about her continuing contributions to the learning process. After we screen the documentary, each of the panelists is going to take about 15 minutes to talk about his or her engagement with the amazing decade and their reflections on it and its implications for the present and the future. And following that, we hope to have a lively exchange, Q&A and commentary with you about all of these matters. So I'm going to begin by introducing Ramona A de Rosales, who has dedicated over 45 years of her life working and advocating for the Latino community and the broader community as well. She's created an array of opportunities, educational and otherwise, through several community-based organizations that she's founded and helped guide. Some of those organizations include Academia Cesar Chavez, bilingual pre-K through 6th grade charter school, where she also served as executive director from 2001 through 2015. She also created the Hispanic pre-college program at the University of St. Thomas, and La Clinica, a health services clinic located on the west side of St. Paul. She worked on behalf of Latino students by creating scholarship opportunities for them at the University of Minnesota and at the University of St. Thomas. She's worked with legislators on both state and national levels to advocate for educational opportunities for the Latino community. She also has strong ties between the Mexican government and Minnesota that resulted in the establishment of the very first Mexican consulate in St. Paul. The Academia Cesar Chavez Charter School had a mission that she defined as that of providing a quality dual language education that prepares critically thinking, socially competent, values-driven, and culturally aware bilingual and biliterate learners by advocating Latino cultural values in an environment of family and community. Ramona received her Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Minnesota and her Master's degree in Educational Leadership and Administration from the University of St. Thomas. She was the former director of the Hispanic Pre-College Project at St. Thomas after 1988, and again, as I mentioned before, co-founder of the Academia Cesar Chavez School. She was executive director again of that school till 2016 and continues to consult on a variety of projects. On this campus, she set up and led the very first Latino student organization, the Latina Liberation Front, from 1969 to 1973. She served on the Chicano Studies Advisory Board here in 1970 and on the Martin Luther King Board back in 1970. And in that sense, again, she became one of the founders of the University of Minnesota Chicano Studies Department and its Chicano House. And more recently, she's been selected by the Department of Chicano and Latino Studies to share her life's work as a Chicana leader on a project called Chicana por mi raza, centered on the collection and preservation of archival materials, ephemera, and oral histories that document the development of Chicana feminists throughout the civil rights era. So again, welcome to Ramona de Rosales. Okay. Mahmoud El-Kati, and introducing him is a bit of a conundrum for me because we have operated together in so many contexts over the last 50 years that I really don't know quite where to begin. But in his own terms, he defines himself as a lecturer, a writer, and a commentator on the African American experience. He specializes in African American history and advocates institution building within cultural communities. He's an advocate of building one's humanity through the understanding of culture, history, and community. He currently lives in the Rondo neighborhood in St. Paul's historic Black sector. He's Professor Emeritus of History at Macalester College in St. Paul, where Macalester has established in his honor the Mahmoud El-Kati Distinguished Lectureship in American Studies, in recognition of his scholarly and community work. The endowment for that lecture brings distinguished scholars to Macalester for extended engagements that includes public presentations, classroom appearances, and conversations with students, faculty, and the local community. He's a prolific writer of articles, essays, and reviews that deal with a wide range of issues, including the myth of race, issues of education, African-American sports, the Black Studies movement, street gangs, Black youth, and so forth. His articles and essays have appeared in newspapers and publications, including the New York Times, the Minneapolis Star and Tribune, the St. Paul Pioneer Press, the Minneapolis Spokesman Recorder, the Nigerian Times, and so on. As a published author, he's written such books as Politically Considered, the 50th commemoration of the Supreme Court decision of 1954, and a book called The Hiptionary, a survey of African-American speech patterns with critical commentary and a digest of keywords and phrases, and a more recent book, Haiti, The Hidden Truth. He's a frequent commentator through a variety of mass media outlets, locally and nationally, a regular columnist for Insight News, a constant commentator at the local radio stations KFAI and KMOJ, and I had the pleasure last evening of conversing with Mahmoud on KMOJ about the Black Studies movement and Black Power and Black Arts movement and so on. He hosts, again, this weekly public affairs radio show called Reflections and Connections on KMOJ, and you need to listen in for it. He is involved in so many educational enterprises, community-based educational enterprises, that it's really impossible to list them all. But some of his venues include his ongoing movie series, right? Both feature films and documentaries hosted at places like the Golden Time Cafe in St. Paul, and an array of others as well. So again, our deep gratitude and welcome to Professor Mahmoud El-Kati. Josie Johnson, born in Houston, Texas, was the daughter of a Houston civil rights pioneer, which enabled her to grow up with a deep and abiding concern for social justice and human and civil rights. She played an active role in the movement for human liberation and civil rights since her teenage years, when she and her father canvassed her hometown of Houston gathering signatures on anti-poll tax petitions. After receiving her BA in sociology from Fisk University and her MA in education from the University of Massachusetts, she came to Minnesota in the 1950s and worked as a lobbyist to help pass Minnesota's anti-discrimination laws. In the early 1960s, she lobbied professionally for passage of bills concerning such issues as fair housing and employment opportunities. In 1964, she traveled from Minneapolis to Mississippi with an integrated group of women to witness and take part in the struggle there. On one occasion, after visiting an open-air freedom school where black folks were organizing, she and her group learned that that school was bombed as a consequence later that same day. She became a community organizer for Project Enable, a pioneering effort in developing parenting skills and strengthening family life. In 1965, a member of the Minneapolis Urban League, a dedicated member of the Minneapolis Urban League, she served as its acting director from 1967 and 1968. She worked with a variety of elected officials many times over many, many years. In 1968, she became a legislative liaison and community liaison and a mayoral aide in Minneapolis during times of great upheaval here and nationwide. As an executive assistant to the Lieutenant Governor of Colorado between 1975 and 1978. She went back to Texas in 78 and supervised Judson Robinson's campaign staff. In 1980, she served as deputy campaign manager for the Jimmy Carter presidential campaign in Tennessee. She's had an ongoing relationship with this university. And in 1971, while teaching as one of the founding faculty members in the Department of African American and African Studies, she was appointed to the University of Minnesota Board of Regents and served there as a regent until 1973. After completing her doctorate of education at the University of Massachusetts, this university offered her a senior fellowship in 1987, and she directed the All-University Forum as diversity director from 1990 to 1992. That year, she became responsible for minority affairs and diversity, and served then as the associate vice president for academic affairs. The university established the annual Josie Johnson Human Rights and Social Justice Award in her honor. In 1992, she accepted a position as the associate vice president in charge of minority affairs, and she founded Josie Johnson and Associates consulting firm in 1996. She's also a Minneapolis Institute of Arts trustee, a Minnesota Medical Foundation trustee, and sat for many years, may still sit as an advisory board for the Harriet Tubman Center. She's a recipient of the Committed to the Vision Award from the Minneapolis Department of Civil Rights and the African American Community Endowment Fund Award. This is just a few of Josie Johnson's accomplishments. And again, it's an extraordinary career, and I'm deeply honored to have her here with us today, and again, continuing what again is a long personal association with her, in which she's been one of my guiding lights. So, welcome to Dr. Josie Johnson. Now, the technology at work. Professor El-Kati. The documentary we have, again, up here on the screen that we're going to view here, Standing on the Shoulders of Giants. We all right, Mike?
I'm fine.
Ready to rumble? Okay. This film documentary, as I said earlier, recounts the January 1969 takeover of the university's Morrill Hall administration building by student members of the Afro-American Action Committee. And the film represents a collaborative effort around a Standing on the Shoulders of Giants conference, student conference, held here at the university in remembrance of that takeover 40 years earlier. The takeover, as again is made clear, again in the documentary, and many of you already know, was instigated by the April 4, 1968 assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. in Memphis, Tennessee. The film project was designed to help new generations of high school and college students better understand such historic events and to help them master the tools of documentary filmmaking, crucial to retelling such events in today's media-centered world. So that project involved staff leaders from the Hope Community Youth and Family Outreach Program, video production instructors from the St. Paul Neighborhood Cable TV Network, and faculty members from our Department of African American and African Studies, again, who worked with student filmmakers to interview original participants of the Moral Hall takeover, as well as community activists and teachers, again, in an effort to recapture this transformative historical event and to explore its meanings for today. Again, so its relevance to our roundtable here are immediate in that regard. And again, in this documentary, you'll see Rosemary Freeman Massey, who I want to say a bit more about it here as well. The director for this project was a local black female filmmaker, and again named Shireen Crooms, again, who used this enterprise as a device, again, for teaching, helping school a new generation of students curious about and struggling to understand a past about which they believed they had received only fragmentary information at best. So, Dad, let's start the documentary. There's a musical overlay that leads into the documentary proper. We're going to show again the first 17 minutes of it.
And you'll give us a moment to move.
Yes, and we'll allow the panelists to move up front so they can see it as well. All right, thank you for the lights, and we'll allow the panelists to return to their seats up front. And I want to share a bit more about Rose Freeman Massey, who, as I said earlier, died this past week in Milwaukee, where she had served as an instructor of African American history at Milwaukee Area Technical College for 33 years, and also as a coordinator of the MATC Just One mentoring program. She was also the faculty advisor to that Milwaukee Black Student Union. She organized and worked in the faith community in Milwaukee over the course of many, many years, served as a staff consultant to clergy for educational options for 10 years. She was a co-founder and sat until the very end on the board of directors of Asata High School. All right. As a founder of that high school that was listed in U.S. News and World Reports as one of the nation's 100 best high schools. She's remained deeply committed to children's agenda and believed that in order to remedy the pathologies in our community that we had to get involved on a mass scale. She became a member as well of the Black Alliance for Educational Options and the Colored Women's Network, along with Horace Huntley and Marie Braddock. She authored the book Nerve Juice that the film referenced here. She was a mother and a grandmother. Again, she received her Bachelor of Arts degree in African American Studies here in 1970, and her Master of Arts degree in American Studies from the University of Minnesota in 1972. She completed additional graduate work in African American and African history at the University of Wisconsin at Milwaukee. As she mentioned in the film, she was born and raised in the Deep South, in Browning, an all-black community located about 3 miles east of Greenwood, Mississippi, where she attended Browning School and graduated from high school in 1964. And after high school, again, she spent time participating in civil rights work in various counties in Mississippi during those crucial years of civil rights organizing, again, in the Deep South. Finally, she made her way to the so-called Promised Land here in North Star State, and enrolled at the University of Minnesota, and had the important foster family, the family of Ken Tilson, the well-known St. Paul lawyer and human rights advocate. Rose had a great deal to say about the impact of her early career in the South on her life. Again, she mentioned the impact of the Emmett Till murder, which took place so close to her, and an image that she carried again throughout her life with it. In high school, however, and this is part of her the educational, intellectual trajectory for her, she discovered books. And she recalled the impact on her of reading Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird, for instance, which resonated powerfully with her. And she became more and more conscious, again, through both reading and activism, with the various forms of oppression that black folks and other folks suffered. By the time of her senior year in high school, she was attending mass meetings with civil rights workers. And when she graduated, she knew that this was going to be her lot. And she said, quote, "I had been called to wage the struggle for liberation, and I could not turn back even if I wanted to. I spent my time working voter registration in Mississippi. I was chased off plantations by the owners and by the Ku Klux Klan for trying to get poor black folk registered to vote. By the time I arrived in Minnesota and reconnected with Endacia Ida Mae Holland, I was prepared mentally for anything. I'd been to jail, I'd been chased, and I had good organizing skills. The ivory tower was ripe with inequalities," end quote. I'd like to ask just for a moment of silence on behalf of Rosemary Freeman Massey. Okay. All right, I'd like now again to give our panelists a chance to talk again about their engagement with the amazing decade, again, their reflections on it, its implications for the present and the future. And I'd like Ramona to begin.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, let me just begin by saying that I'm very honored to be here with such wonderful old acquaintances and friends and supporters of the past. And thank you all for inviting me to be able to share some of my activism of the 1960s. And I want to thank you all for your contributions to our society. And thank you for your sacrifices, because many times we're not told thank you. And I want to say thank you to all of you. Thank you very much. Well, I need to just, before I talk about my engagement at the University of Minnesota, I just want to go back a little bit to when I was a senior in high school. And I went to my high school counselor, and I went to South High in Minneapolis, and he wanted to meet with me, and he told me, "I want to tell you that you are not college material. So whatever you do, do not think of going to college. You are in the work program, and your mom is a single mom, and there's two of you, and I think you ought to continue on the work program to help your mom financially, but do not think of college." So, you know, I was not college bound, let's say. But so during also my senior year, it happened to be the time of the civil rights movement started to happen in the 1969, 68, 69 at that time when I was in high school. And black students started to organize, and they started to invite me to meetings in my high school. And I started to attend. And so I was on fire, and they brought me to a meeting here at the University of Minnesota so that we could meet with other students. And I thought, I wonder if there's anything for us Mexicans. I wonder if there's anything. I love it, and I'm ready to support my black brothers and sisters, but is there anything for us? So anyway, I met into this wonderful person that we all know, a good friend of ours and a counselor at General College, which I want to mention her name, Beverly Stewart. She was an encourager and a motivator to many of us. And she said to me, "Are you here to sign up for college?" And it was the summer of '69. I said, "No, actually I'm not. I'm here because I believe that my job is to just be an activist. I'm not here to go to college because I'm not college material. And she said, well, I'll make you a deal. If you sign up for a college course, and if you do well in that course, you have to sign up for other courses. And I said, okay, but I know I won't do well. I said, and she goes, and I'll help you to organize on campus. I said, fine, we got a deal. So I did. I signed up for a course, and would you know it was a communications course, and I aced the darn course. And so then I had to sign up for other courses. But my thing was, I was here to organize. I was here for student activism. Like I say, my black brothers and sisters had really empowered me, and I was going to do what I needed to do. And so, so it was during the late 1960s and the early 70s that I was a student activist at the University of Minnesota. It was the time of the civil rights movement and the Chicano movement around the country. And so when I started in '69, when I started, there were only 4 Chicano Latino students that we could identify, only 4 on campus. And so I became, as a student recruiter, I worked for the admissions office. And my job was to help enroll and bring more Chicano Latinos onto campus, right? So I went out to the local high schools and to the migrant camps and started recruiting students. As a student, I was a student. And I started to work with the financial aid office because we didn't know anything about financial aid. We didn't know how to fill out the applications. I said, teach me so I can help my other students that I'm recruiting on how to fill out these applications and how to fill out the financial aid forms. So we went out to the migrant camps and we started to recruit students, and the families were really afraid to let their children go to college. This was just something unheard of. And so we had to encourage the families. We had to let them know that their children were going to be well taken care of here at the university, and we encouraged them. And so I remember Beverly Stewart says to me, and some of the folks said to me, that they remember that the first thing I used to do when we brought in students is I used to say, here's a picket sign, welcome to the University of Minnesota, because your job was not only to be a student, but your job was to be an activist, to be involved in changing and bringing about change to the university. And so once we began to enroll students and we had more students, we started an organization called the Latin Liberation Front, which they made me the president of, and I was the president of the Latin Liberation Front. And out of that, we worked really closely with our black brothers and sisters. And we had support, as the documentary shows, from our SDS students as well. And we learned from them of the takeover of Morrill Hall. And we said, well, we see that we need some things for the Chicanos as well. And again, this is a movement that's going on all over the country, just like the civil rights movement, the Chicano movement was happening. Cesar Chavez was now California. You had Corky Gonzalez, for the Crusade for Justice. Things were happening all over the country. It was a beautiful time to grow up in. And so what happened is that we learned, and from Rosemary, from Anna Stanley, from others. Now, we didn't have here on campus, we weren't fortunate to have there were no Latino faculty. There was one that we could identify, and he just passed, Alfredo Gonzalez, who worked in the Spanish and Portuguese department. And he kind of guided us and kind of helped us along as well. But again, we had to learn from our black brothers and sisters. And so they took over Morrill Hall, and we said, you know what? We want a Chicano Studies department. We want a Chicano Studies department. And we've seen what happened in the takeover of when our black brothers and sisters took over Morrill Hall. And so we said, we went and we brought the community, and we brought the Brown Berets, and we took over Morrill Hall as well. We took over Morrill Hall, and we had some of our black brothers and sisters join us, and some SDSers join us, and community members join us, and students, the few students that we had already recruited, and we took over Morrill Hall. Now, I'll tell you, it didn't go exactly the way it did for the black students, because by that time, President Moose was a bit smarter and Don Sanders. And they had said, wait a minute, we don't want this to repeat over again. So we walked in with our demands. I walked in with our demands to President Moose and Vice President Don Sanders. And they said, you know what, this is a time of retrenchment. We cannot support, we are trying to answer to the Black studies. Why don't the American studies and the Black studies and Chicano studies, why don't you all make it one program? So no, we are not going to have one program because Blacks have contributions, American Indians have contributions, and the Chicanos have contributions. So no, we do not. They go, well, you know what, and we just wanted a program because right now the university has no resources. We're in a time of retrenchment, and so we cannot give you a program. So we fought, we rallied, we had demonstrations, we demanded and yes? And 2 years later, this was in 1970, and 2 years later, 1972, when my husband would come from Chicago, he was not my husband then, and he'd say, I bet you're not going to, I said, because they want us to have a program. I said, but we want a department. And he said, I bet you don't get a department. He said, there are other places all over the country. They're getting programs, not departments. I said, no, we want a department. And 2 years later, we got a department. In 1972, we got a department. Here's a brother of mine that helped sit on the committee. And like I said, I didn't even remember I had sat on the Martin Luther King Committee, but I do kind of recall that. And, you know, so we worked together. We worked together. We learned from each other. And there was a unity on campus between the Black students, the SES students, and the Chicano students. We worked together. It was the time of that Cesar Chavez was organizing. And Cesar Chavez, the American labor rights leader and activist, came here to Minnesota. And he was looking for students to help organize and work in his movement. And so he heard about me, and he came to my house, knocking on the door. I tell you, he was the most humblest man that you could ever meet. And sat me down and told me that taught me just strategies of community organizing. And at that time, you know, who's Cesar Chavez? You know, and I'm this 19-year-old, and you know, I'm listening to this man, and such a humble, humble man. And so I learned community organizing from Cesar Chavez, and I was able with all the students. We had one student who fasted, and we were able to remove all the grapes from campus during the early 70s. All grapes from the whole campus. None of the campus restaurants, nowhere would you see a grape. We were able to take all the grapes off of campus. We also boycotted in many of the stores, local stores as well. You know, I later on, and I want to talk about, you know, we challenged the university also that we needed to get more professionals. So we challenged the administration, and we were able to get 10 scholarships for individuals for law school, 10 scholarships in medical school, and 10 scholarships in the School of Business. And today, many of those individuals have become lawyers and judges in our community, are now retired. We have school administrators, teachers, many of the school leaders that were able to take advantage of some of those scholarships, and some of the doctors too that are in our community. The other thing is that we created Chicano Latino we created a Chicano Latino Cultural Art Center, La Raza Center, that was formerly known as the Latin Liberation. And what happened is that the Chicano studies over the first 10 years was very, very strong. But then later on, within the university, the Chicano studies started to downsize. And there was a period where there was only one professor and a part-time retired professor and a professor from the Department of Women's Studies who taught one course once a year. but talk about what happens with emerging leaders. So now we're going to the year, I believe, of the 2000, if I'm correct, right, Katie? In the 2000, and some new leaders emerged because they had invited me. There had been times that I've been invited to come save the Chicano Studies Department. There have been rallies, there have been meeting with the administration, and back and forth over the years, and the department was dwindling down to nothing. And so, you know, I had come to the time where I had said, one of them was my daughter, this is the year 2000, and Katie Avina, who's here present today, they came to me and they said, you know, we really need your help because they were students here, and we really want to bring back the department. I said, I've been to so many rallies, to so many meetings, and I think you ought to just let that go. And they go, how can you say that? You're the founder of Chicano Studies. How can you say that? You fought so hard. I said, maybe it's just time. Maybe there is no hope with the university anymore. And maybe it's time to let it go. They said, well, we're not going to let it go. So these students, some were students from the Chicano Studies, and some were just students at the University of Minnesota, in 2000 fought and fought and fought with the dean and had rallies and had demonstrations and went back to administration, and they revived and history changed, and we now have a strong, thriving Department of Chicano Studies again because of these students' activism, because these students said, no, we're not going to let what you started in the 1960s, we're not going to let it go. So a new group of students emerged, and the history for Chicano Studies changed. And today we have faculty, we have a department chair, we have the department is thriving, it's growing, and you know, it's going to celebrate soon in a couple of years, 50 years of existence. And I want to thank those students, and I want to thank that they did not let the fight go on. They didn't stop the fight. They wanted it to continue. So we talk about reflections. Reflections for me are that I believe that because of my activism, it got me to do the things I did in my career. But it was a calling, and I believe that we need to encourage that and continue to encourage that. What am I doing to encourage that now? I'm continuing to mentor what I call the emerging Latino leaders. And I believe that it's important to continue to mentor, to continue to encourage. The purpose of the liberal arts is that they say that we're going to become entrepreneurs, philanthropists, leaders, change agents, fueling our society. And that purpose must continue in liberal arts. Well, in order for that to continue, I think we all need to be activists. I think we all need to, and we don't have to go into how many things there are right now that we need to take a stand for. But the one thing I try to instill in the emerging leaders is this sense of purpose, activism, duty to our society, how important it is, and how wonderful it is to be able to make contributions to change, to better our society. And I hope that what I've seen students emerging in the 2000s, that students continue to emerge, but that has to be encouraged. I think that, you know, it's one thing that's been encouraged of being a professional, paying attention to our studies, it's very important, but being engaged is what really, where I did all my learning and what helped me to be, and helped me to do the work that I did in my career. So, thank you.
All right, thank you. Now, was it?
Thank you. Is my thing on? Can you all hear me? It's not on. I have to turn it on? Now it's on? It is? Oh. Better? Okay. I want to thank you, my dear sister. I'll say that. As you were talking, Ramona, I was reflecting And but what can I say that would be of some value? You know, where do you start? I learned this from an old philosophy teacher. His name was Professor Jones, but he's one of those professors with all the initials first, you know, R.D.D.D. Jones, you know. Couldn't figure out what his name was. But he was once declared the most educated Negro in America, Dr. Jones, big thing. He was from New England. He had that kind of different background. He said, if you're lost for what to say, just start from the general and move to the specific. Or do the inverse. And I was thinking about how you paint this picture that I'm familiar with. There are two ways to look at it. Abraham Lincoln said something that we all need to unpack. And it has nothing to do with anybody's race as such. It's the product of history. Lincoln came to the conclusion that freedom to the slave assures freedom to the free. Unpack that. You were describing for me a kind of crazy quilt. We're all on that quilt. You know what a crazy quilt looks like. It's different patches, colors, textures. It's all one quilt. And this quilt is about human dignity, respect for the human personality, as King would say it. That's what I've come to conclude. It's about human beings, being respected as human beings, because they're human beings. Because they're human beings. You don't have to do anything special. Just be born. It's not far away from what Jefferson said about all men are created equal. They're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That applies to everyone if you're a human being. But we know that's an ideal, that's an aspiration, that's not real. Politics don't allow that. Myth doesn't allow that. And I think that what we all are gripped by is this powerful myth. I call it white supremacy, other people call it racism. It's too amorphous. It's one force. I don't see any kind of racism in America. Or I see cultural affirmation, that sort of thing. Everybody does that. I don't see any Native American racism. There's one expression of racism, and it comes from European history that we know. This is a modern idea. The idea of race is very recent in human history. That people whom we've been called white have been calling themselves white. That's fairly recent. It happened in the context of the Columbus thing. And all these things happened just about at the same time. It is centered around the Atlantic slave trade. That's where Negroes come from. That's where Indians, well, there are no Indians out on this land. Oh, they're trying to teach you that I miss my our day where we the Indigenous Day. You see, we're on the same wavelength. And I missed it this year. I generally go to something during the Indigenous Peoples Day. One of my good talking friends was Vernon Belcourt, not his brother. I know him, but I knew his late brother recently, and we had lots of cultural exchanges and so forth, and I learned a little bit about Native American people from him. It was very important what you said about, how the connection between you and black people who happen to be some other different human beings, but nevertheless human beings. And it was an idea that needed to be shared. Most people don't do that, particularly white liberals who are our friends, who do not tell what they know about black people. Not really. It has to be framed again in a white supremacy context, even though the person is a liberal. Half of this stuff, if Jimmy Baldwin said is the real truth about the American Negro would be revealed in American history, you would find that you would be not only be liberating the minds of black people who know nothing about their history, but you'll also be liberating the minds of white people who know nothing about their history either. And I'm talking about the United States history. I claim to know more about American history and its complexity than the President of the United States. I'll take any test with him. Plus, because American people who are defined as white are largely given this wonderful mythical history. I don't mean nothing is true. Myth is grounded in some fact, some truth, all myth. But it's crazy how unknowing white Americans are. I know I'm supposed to be talking about moral law, but I'm saying, moving from the general to the specific. That needs to be said loud and clear. That the doctrine, racism, you say it, I say, it's white supremacy. That idea, that doctrine which is flowered in the last 400 years, is the greatest myth ever created. It makes witchery and all these things, possession looks like child's play because it's all over the world. It's everywhere. It's an international system. Now, obviously whites know that, I mean the business community and that kind of stuff, but the average white person, well-educated, intelligent, never thinks about that because he's a victim of an ideology as much as the German people were victims of ideology during Hitler's reign. It's the same phenomenon. It's a way of seeing the world, tunnel vision. Don't see this way or that way. It's my way. And so you can't have a conversation. I no longer talk to certain white people. I'll never reject humanity because it's useless. It's like a shield comes up and blocks out everything that they don't know or don't agree with. That's my opinion. Now let me say that clearly. I was talking about John or Josie. I'm not a race, I know that. And neither are you. If you're white, I'm not a race, I'm talking about me, what I think about the race question. So, I'm very angry. This is Mahmoud El-Kati talking. Not a race. I'm an individual. This is what I think about race. But you could meet some black person in the street who, when you leave this hall, doesn't agree with me. And that's okay. Because race is not human or personal, it's political. It's about politics and power. And we are at that moment where it's very clear. Donald Trump is not as dumb as we think he is. He understands the ethos of Europeans. He understands the nature of what triggers that aggression. He understands that, you know, as dumb as he sounds. And that's what's happening now. The most well-organized people right now in this country identified with Donald Trump. And it will come to light very shortly. They identify because he's touching nerves and so forth that cause this response. And we don't want to talk about that. That's particularly liberals. They can't even say white supremacy. Because the doctrine is white supremacy doesn't mean you are. You don't have to agree with that. The German people weren't Nazis. Most of them weren't Nazis. But Hitler took over the apparatus of the state because people had these germs in their head. Well, they didn't start with Hitler. Racism is here long before Hitler showed up. It goes back to the Nordic myth. It goes back to that whole thing about blonde hair and so forth. It's long before Hitler. Let me surprise you with another. Well, I'm not surprising you. That whites know that I know of, scholars. Anybody who's read William Shirer's The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, which I think is the most comprehensive thing done on Nazi Germany. Somewhere in that book, in the middle of it, there's this argument about race, Hitler with one of his lieutenants or Goebbels or whoever. And Hitler was pushing race, and the guy said, you know, scientifically, it doesn't add up on what science says is observation and consistency. That's what science, it must be consistent with what you observe. And he said, race doesn't do that. And Hitler said, you don't know that I know as much as those pointed-headed intellectuals at the university that there's no such thing as race, scientifically speaking. I know that. But I need a conception to recast the world with the beliefs of the people in Western Europe about blonde-headedness and so forth. That's in everybody's head. That was before he showed up. About Caucasian, which entered the English language in 1795 by one of those early race scientists, Blumenbach. They didn't call themselves whites, are not even comfortable with that now. They call themselves Caucasian because they're not sure what they're talking about. They're not sure. Let me cut to the quick about this, what I think, and then I'll just say something about Moral Hall and what I think and feel. I believe as you do. I don't believe in race. I think it's like a religion, something you believe. You believe it, and scientific truth ain't got a chance against myth. Yes, most people do that. Human beings are myth-making creatures. It's not white. It's not black. It's a part of the human experience, is making myth. And some myths have been very dangerous. But this is the most dangerous of it. Ashley Montague was correct in his classic work. Man's most dangerous myth is the fallacy of race. Book written in 1943. I discovered it while I was in college and never heard of Ashley Montague. How many of you have heard of Ashley Montague? What do you see? That's crazy. Next to Margaret Mead, he's perhaps the most well-known cultural anthropologist. Think about that. People never heard of Ashley Montague. He was white, I was black. He turned me on to race thinking, understanding it. That's part of why I think like I think. Ideas don't have colors. He went through the whole thing. The etymology of the word, when it entered the English language, you know, in a book called Book of Martyrs in 1575, the term race entered the English language academic. It's a fairly new phenomenon. What is wrong with race is that the fact of race, like how I look, is race. The fact of race goes beyond the fact. It has nothing to do with biology. That's what you're really talking about. Culture, and that's what so much emphasis is placed on intelligence. You know, blacks, whites have it, and I don't have it. You know, because the color takes care of that. You go beyond the fact of color, which has nothing to do with your color. You acquire language and religion. People at the University of Minnesota know this, if I do. You know, so race is a myth. And a myth is always based on some fact that you can point out, some little truth. And then you elaborate from there, and you create all kinds of stuff and attribute it to the fact, to one fact, like skin color or hair form and so forth. That's utter nonsense. There are people at the University of Minnesota knows this. I was in the race conference that was brought here to the Scientific Museum maybe 4 or 5 years ago. It came back recently. It's two panelists, me and the head of the American Anthropological Society. He, a layman, stuff I spoke for, matched what his scientific findings are. And of course, science finally has repudiated race as nothing but a social construction.
Professor El-Kati, you're waxing very eloquent, but I'm going to.
You get nervous.
I'm going to hold you for a moment so that we let Dr. Johnson have her say, and then we'll rejoin the exchange.
She knows what I'm doing, but go ahead.
Dr. Johnson.
Thank you very much, John. And audience, I'm sorry we have to interrupt for a moment. This wonderful history that Mahmoud is attempting to share with us, because the work of the students in 1969 and their effort to make a difference here at the University of Minnesota is so critical. It was not 1969 that I learned about the University of Minnesota. I've been involved in the university since 1957. My children went to the university's nursery school. I became engaged in the university in the very early years of my life in Minnesota. So it's been kind of a pen point for me that most things can emanate from my arrival in Minnesota and my continuous activity. By 1969, there had been activity among many of us, including John and Mahmoud and Mary and Horace and many others, in a way to what we called then the gown and academy relationship. And so we worked on extending what we knew and what we offered from the university to our community. So it was the academy reaching into the community and the community reaching back into itself to understand its role and its commitment. So by the time we were faced with and understanding the struggle of our students of 1967, many of our African American community members had reached out into our community. We took graduates from the university who did not have what we considered a graduation exercise that acknowledged them, their work, their history, their culture. So we would often have programs off this campus into other places, Black churches, Black schools. In 1967, 68, 69, when our students were reflecting the same kind of national concern that Black students had across the nation throughout these wonderful institutions, bringing in scholars to talk about curricular development and what courses needed to be taught, how they should be taught, and by whom, became kind of an accepted series of conversations. I can remember when our students finally took over Morrill Hall, our concern, many in the community, was to protect them, to make sure the police did not come and arrest them, that our children had food, water, and protection as they did what every generational group of young people feel they must do to make a difference. And what our students saw was that they needed to remain together, united, committed to the struggle, and not to allow some of the old myths about dividing us, the good ones from the bad ones, the accepted ones from not accepted ones, and then to create an environment that supported and encouraged our students to stay strong. And as Ramona said earlier, the president of the University of Minnesota, Malcolm Moose, at that time understood the moment we were in and the moment that his patience, his collectivity of his colleagues, those performing academic responsibilities around him, understood what these students were saying. The program became an African American studies program, became an African American studies department. And we then encouraged our African brothers and sisters to become a part of this. So I was fortunate, as my colleagues here on the dais were, to become a part of the first faculty. My interest was the study of Black families in white America. And I had gotten this awareness of the need from a conference that had been sponsored by the National Urban League and some of the scholars of that period who were studying issues dealing with Black families and welfare systems and education opportunities. We were able to create then, in this white institution, within the creative department of African American Studies at the University of Minnesota, various programs that addressed academically and directly the issues dealing with African American people. I think if we did nothing else as the outside adult senior community members in observing and respecting what our students were doing was to listen. Listen to what they felt deeply responsible for the next generation. And that's kind of the way African American and our other brothers and sisters of ethnic responsibilities have always felt. The need to continue the struggle of our ancestors and teach. So when I had a chance then to serve on the Board of Regents, after my engagement with the students from Morrill Hall, Department of African American Studies, to then a position of policy relative to us as a people, I was able then to engage my brothers and sisters from other parts of the struggle to create programs in which the issues facing us as a collective people, denying students a complete education, denying students a real opportunity to understand the historical, cultural rationale and importance of a people, we were able then not only to study what was the common understanding within the society about us ethnically different people and the role of a land grant institution. The University of Minnesota is a land grant institution whose responsibility it is to know what's going on in the environment in which it is placed as its academic source, and then force that system to respond to those various needs of its land grant responsibility. So the African American students on our campus who were responding to a need for their own sense of worth by having their history taught in an academic institution, and to have the professionals respect that, teach it, build on it, create policies and laws that reflect and respect the history and culture of its differences. I maintain that the African American Studies Department opened the doors for all of the other ethnic groups that felt a need to be heard, understood. We then had the Chicano, we had the American Indian, we had the Asian, we had women's studies, we had various logical, cultural languages introduced in the curriculum. So the opportunity on the part of the African American Studies Department and its focus opened the doors for all kinds of enlarging of learning and opportunities on the part of students entering the University of Minnesota. And to do it in a way that respects how a university functions and what is its role as a land-grant institution. So I see the model that those students presented to us in the 60s, in the 70s. They continued throughout the next decade. They are a role model for the rest of us. If you believe in justice, information, education, opportunity, stick with that belief. Hold on, as Ramona said, you're surprised sometimes to see how happy others are that you were brave enough, strong enough, committed enough, determined enough to make a change. We need a change in our academic structure. We need an awareness of what's going on in our world. We need people to be willing to sit, talk, listen, and then act. And we have to determine what are the critical elements for action so that our students and young people feel that some progress has been made. I pray they don't feel as their elder Josie, who is 88, going on 90, living through a period that never thought I or my children would have to go through, and yet here we are, and I'm not sure we're teaching our children to be strong, to know why the 60s movement meant a lot, or why the students at the University of Minnesota were willing to take over a building that was not only critical then, is critical now, and suffer the consequences. Our students need to know from whence the struggles have come and what they must do. It's my joy and blessing to have had a chance to be here and to share that and to beg you to support those students who are out there today with the belief that things can be different and that they have a role in creating the difference. This struggle, my friends, continues with a deepening, as Mahmoud said, understanding of how deep supremacy has been taught. So our children have to know what that deep well of supremacy is and how they have to be strong, courageous, and willing to sacrifice to bring us to a democracy that supports justice and freedom. So I thank you and hope we have time for conversation.
All right, thank you. I'm watching the clock. I want to make certain that we do have time for Q&A and comments. So I'll keep my comments about my place in the amazing decade comparatively brief. One thing that I might say about the Moral How Takeover and the Afro-American Action Committee, again, which I was a part as a member of the executive committee, and the person who drafted the 7 demands that we submitted to Malcolm Moose, is that we were not a monolith in terms of our outlook and experiences and backgrounds. We represented black folks from various parts of the country, from different social classes and kinds of communities. And we were not all of a mind in terms of our political outlooks, our strategic perspectives, and so forth. We had discussed at some length what the prospects might be for taking over the administration building. And there were a variety of attitudes about it. And there were some key folks who advised strongly against it based on what had happened on other campuses prior to that. We had strong divisions about to what extent Dr. King's philosophy of nonviolent civil disobedience ought to be our guide, or whether the voices, again, of the new black power strategy and outlook ought to be our guide. And again, we had different institutional experiences in terms of the educational environment here and in terms of our own growing up. As Rosemary Freeman said, both on the film, as I said earlier on, she was from the Deep South, all right? Greenwood, Mississippi in the era. Horace Huntley was from Alabama, also in the Deep South, and had come to the university after serving in the military. All right? Rose's groundwork struggle had taken place in the Deep South in the Civil Rights Movement. Anna Stanley was from the East Coast, from Philadelphia. None of them were from Minnesota and didn't have a Minnesota background. That's part of what made things a bit different for me. All right? On my father's side, I was 4th generation Minnesota. My father's people had come to Minnesota from small towns outside of Lexington during the aftermath of Reconstruction in the Deep South. They were part of those black refugees who fled the rise of Southern Jim Crow and headed north for other prospects. And I'm named for my grandfather, who himself was the only son of one of the longest-serving 9th Cavalry Buffalo soldiers. My grandfather had in part grown up on the Fort Duchesne regimental home of the 9th Cavalry before himself completing a college degree in one of the normal and agricultural schools created by the Freedmen's Bureau during the post-Civil War years. He was someone whom I have he died when I was 7 years old. My recollections of him are of only seeing him in a 3-piece Edwardian suit. A scholar and a gentleman who knew Latin and Greek and had a huge personal library, but who worked at the post office here, in part because he couldn't get a job teaching in the Minnesota school system. No black teachers were allowed to teach in Minnesota schools. And he had done what so many college-educated black folks was go to the post office, work in the post office. He wanted his children to have a formal education, and he had 5 sons, 2 daughters. And he and my grandmother had prospered enough, although they came here with nothing literally but the clothes on their backs, so that it was possible for them to send their children to college. His oldest sons, because, well, I'll cut to the chase. The generation that I represent of undergraduates who are part of the Afro-American Action Committee, in terms of my own family line, is part of a trans-generational process of struggle with this institution. For 3 generations, the members of my family have wrestled with the University of Minnesota over basic issues of educational access, of human dignity, of citizenship rights, and so forth. My grandfather despaired in the 1920s in terms of sending his older sons to the University of Minnesota. Instead, directed them to the historically black colleges in the Deep South. But his youngest children, my father and my aunt, Martha, had graduated from high school, from North High School, at a time when there were only a handful of black students at North High School. It was not a black high school then. My aunt, in fact, had been the valedictorian of North High School, class of 1934. Had graduated at 15. She and my father entered the university then, and my father was the only black student in the School of Mortuary Science. My aunt, the only black student in what was then called the School of Technology. math and science major, one of only 4 or 5 women then in the School of Technology. The then president, Lotus Kaufman, and his deans, Nicholson, Coffey, so forth, instituted a regime of Jim Crow on the university campus that barred black students from living in university dormitories, that reinforced the segregationist policies of the fraternities and sororities on campus, that failed to challenge professors openly teaching white supremacist doctrines in the campus and so forth. And in the wake of all, in 1937, my aunt, my father, and a group of this tiny number of black students on campus organized the very first black student organization on this campus called the Council of Negro Students. And with the assistance then of the NAACP and the Urban League, allies in the Jewish community and so forth, all right, they went to the Lotus Kaufman, just tried to meet with Lotus Kaufman over these issues. He refused to meet with them, called them communists, and so forth. But it began the first confrontation with the University of Minnesota over fundamental issues, again, of access and educational democracy. So I grew up hearing stories, again, from my aunt, from my father, and from their other friends about the University of Minnesota and reasons why so many native-born black Minnesotans did not come to the university, but went again to the historically black colleges and universities. So when I became part of AAAC, and when I called that evening from Morrill Hall to tell my parents that we were in Morrill Hall and were not going to leave, and that we expected to be jailed over it, my parents did not say, "Don't do this." They said, "Be careful." We were part of what, in other words, was a transgenerational struggle with this institution and institutions like it. And the points that Dr. Johnson made about the mission, again, part of this roundtable is to deal with the impact of students on the mission of the college over these many, many years. And that mission has been embattled for a very long time. We are presently battling over the land grant mission of this university and the directions in which elites of various sorts are trying to push it, and the directions that people with a more broadly democratic vision of educational responsibility where it wants us to go. One of the things that we ought to clarify about the land grant mission, I said this on another occasion, I'll say it briefly here, is that we need in some ways to go back to the original moral acts that created the land grant colleges and universities of this country. It takes us back to 1857, when Justin Morrill, all right, who was the son of an illiterate Vermont blacksmith, who had never had a chance to go to school, but along with his son, eventually managed to create a healthy business that made them prosperous and allowed Justin Morrill to devote himself to public service. Justin Morrill had began trying to create public education in this country at a time when there was no public education. All right? In the context of the battles over slavery and sectional division in the 1850s. In 1857, he first tried to put a bill through the Congress that was voted down by President James Buchanan, who was closely allied with the slave South process. In 1861, Morrill resubmitted his act to try to establish these new colleges, again, for the masses, as it were. But the Civil War had begun. And ultimately, it wouldn't be until 1862, again, the second year of Civil War, with Abraham Lincoln as president, that the Morrill Act would be passed. Part of Morrill's rationale for it was linked to the fact that he was also an abolitionist. And one of his responses, again, to Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation was as follows: "Having emancipated a whole race, shall it be said that there our duty ends, leaving the race as cumberers of the ground, to live or to wilt and perish, as the case may be? They are members of the American family, and their advancement concerns us all. While swiftly forgetting all they ever knew as slaves, shall they have no opportunity to learn anything as freemen? And the act itself, the language of the act that he provided in 1862, said as follows, in establishing at least one college in every state, quote, upon a sure and perpetual foundation, accessible to all, but especially to the sons of toil, where all of the needful science for the practical avocations of life shall be taught, where neither the higher graces of classical studies nor that of military drill that our country now so greatly appreciates will be entirely ignored, and where agriculture, the foundation of all present and future prosperity, may look for troops of earnest friends, studying its familiar and recondite economies, and at last elevating it to that higher level where it may fearlessly invoke comparison with the most advanced standards of the world, unquote. All right? That vision of just and moral was a vision that, as far as we understood it as students, that we were actually pursuing. And it's a vision, again, of the mission of this university and the College of Liberal Arts, to which we need to have regular reference, all right, in these times and in the years ahead. All right, and so let me close with that and open the floor for questions and comments from you. Mike, yes.
Thank you for that. There are 16 of those land-grant colleges among black people.
Yes.
Florida A&M, Tennessee State, it was Oprah Winfrey School.
Yeah, the second phase of the Morrill Act in 1890 helped establish many of the historically black colleges and universities.
Josie Jackson School is North Carolina A&T. Those are land-grant colleges for black. They're only 16, and now they're trying to destroy them, of course. Sure. White people know nothing about that in the generality. Good, nice, decent, liberal, God-fearing, dog-loving white people. don't know a thing about this. This is what I'm talking about.
The moral...
Yeah. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
You wanna, I was trying to make my point why I was saying and John knows this and Josie knows this. I'm not going to talk to any audience unless they are, I don't care whether you want to hear it, but I'm going to bring it up. The doctrine of white supremacy is the source of all the problems, and it's practically all about race. That's what I think. If you don't want to discuss that, you don't want to solve the race problem, because that's what created it. Do you understand that? These laws, all the institutions, racism is effective through the institutional life of America. Every institution established by whomever, the guys who started the government, were white supremacists. That's just, Mahmoud didn't make that up. Read Thomas Jefferson's book. Read Thomas Jefferson's book. Which book is that? This Notes on the State of what?
Virginia. Yes.
And let me see. This is going to take but a minute, because I don't believe. But no, I don't believe in race. I've learned how to overcome that madness. But here's a thing. I think people left to their own devices, many times white and black people, if they didn't have these politicians feeding them all this stuff, would resolve some things themselves. It wouldn't change the course of history, but it would at least be relational. People would relate to one another as human beings. Here's an odd part of my life. There is a certain conservative in this state, I think I just told you that story, Johnny, whom many of you might know his name. I don't know how we met. We met at some meeting, and out of that meeting evolved, talking to one another, never agreeing. Now, he wasn't crazy like these people who call themselves conservatives. He was a gentleman, polite, conservative, know all the real conservative values, not just a racist type thing. I don't know how we started talking, but I was still at McAllister, and he used to come by, and we used to talk about the issues of the day, but we don't agree. And see, that's what I know people, he doesn't agree, he can tolerate me, I'm saying, I don't agree with anything hardly you say except that we're both human beings and so forth. And I call the people who founded this society as white supremacists. They were slaveholders. I think they could pass for white supremacists if you slaveholders. You know, 4 out of the first 5 presidents of this country were slaveholders. 10 out of the first 18 were slaveholders. Thomas Jefferson was a slaveholder. But that's where the myth comes in. You see, the myth said, look, you can't say that about Thomas. Yes, I can, because he's a man like me. I don't think he was God, like white people. He's a brilliant human being. Wrote enough stuff to cover half of this room. But he also wrote Notes on the State of Virginia, which is one of the most classical white supremacist writings. That's the only book that comes under his name. But people don't want to hear that. You know, in 1781, people don't want to hear that Thomas Jefferson was a racist. He was a nice man, a gentleman, spoke several languages. You know that? He too loved dogs. And I get on Weiss about that, caring more about dogs than human life. You got stuff out there in the street, you know, Native American people especially, in these tents, in these camps, in the richest country in the world. That is not some white racist politician alone. It's us. I mean, it's the people who allow that to happen. You won't challenge. When I look at Jeff Sessions, my blood boils, because I know what he is. But white people, you know, he just missed being a Klansman. I thank Hugo Black, who sat on the Supreme Court, who acknowledged that he was a Klansman and turned out to be the most liberal on the court, right, during the Warren Court. Hugo Black grew up in the Klan's thing. He was a white, snarling cracker. He reformed his life. That's what I believe in. I believe that people can change, but you got to put it on the table. So this gentleman, I don't want to call his name because, and some of you know him, he's high up in the Republican ranks. He was once the head of a prestigious law school. He was a diplomat. He speaks several languages and so forth. When I brought that up, that Jefferson, I said he was a quintessential racist. That's what he kind of ticked up. What do you mean by that, Jefferson? He is, man. He tells you that. He said, where do you get that from? I said, well, he wrote a book called Notes on the State of Virginia. He said, I never heard of it. I said, I don't believe you. See? I just don't believe a man like you. You're not any everyday walk around ignorant white man in the street. You're a well-educated intellectual. And you're a lawyer. You never heard of Notes on the State of Virginia? I'm not talking about the mass of American people. So I don't believe you, and we left it at that. But what happened 6 weeks later, I picked up the Pioneer Press and looked at the editorial page, which is the most important page. And there was this huge, they gave him a half page. Shame on Thomas Jefferson, or something to that effect. And he went enumerating some of the things that he did. I found the book, he said. I didn't know it existed. But the other thing he said, he acknowledged that it came out of our conversation, which most whites don't do. They're very dismissive of people like me, and I understand that. He's crazy, or he's a militant, or he's something. He hang out with some communists, whatever. Just dismiss you. He didn't. He's a conservative. He put it in the press. That's what needs to be done.
Professor El-Kati?
Yeah, okay, I'm sorry.
Brother, okay.
Y'all,
All right.
yeah. he knows.
Professor Shaw,
Got it.
had a question or comment?
Yes, I have a comment to Professor Shaw, Associate Professor, School of Music. I'm here actually to learn because I've been hearing about this history at the University of Minnesota, and I wanted to learn as much as I could. One of the things that I find, you talk about white supremacy. I think one of the ways in which it manifests itself today, while we're here talking, there's a whole system of economic apartheid. And I think that is part of how the racism or white supremacy manifests itself. Can you imagine? And for me, because of the kind of car I drive, my salary is tied to that. Somebody tells me that, you drive, that's not for you. The same way that you're told, it's not for you, you're not college material. But so that is one way of controlling us. Yes, we have opportunities for educational advancement, but then when we advance in that way, if you look at the bottom line, because this country measures everything by the bottom line, then you see where, the buck stops, so to speak.
Yes. All right. Other questions or comments?
Thank you.
Yes, John, Professor Freeman.
You've taught here now for a lot of years.
Hmm.
And
35.
And you were part of this. And Ramona's talking about a new generation in which she's trying to instill activism. Do you see that activism in the students you've taught over the years? Has it grown? Has it become stronger? Or do we need a particular historical moment in someone like Martin Luther King or the draft or whatever to mobilize these kids? Because I don't see it. I see them pursuing Alexis or I see the materialism and the economic motivations. I don't see that activism in my classes.
Yes.
Do you see it in yours? I mean, do you see it growing in
I do, but it is indeed a different time. It is indeed a different time. And, it's also a world in which, the world of the 1960s, as I mentioned here on the documentary, was the world not only, again, of the transition from civil rights and to black power, and of tremendous urban disorders, rebellions, riots, and so on and so forth, but also of the Vietnam War. And the war itself, the draft hovering over college campuses was one of the major stimuli for student activism and connections to world affairs. One of the more effective ways of defusing activism on campuses was putting an end to the draft system and creating a so-called volunteer army, which of course feeds itself primarily from the base of the social pyramid. Nonetheless, there are still student groups and clusters of activists on this campus. And over just the last 4 or 5 years, students have, under a variety of different umbrellas, whose diversity, for instance, all right, again, made attempts to take over President Kaler's office and to confront the administration over continuing issues that remain unresolved on this campus. The work of 1968 and 1969 has produced results that indeed help transform the mission not only of the College of Liberal Arts, but of the university at large. But that's an incomplete mission. And the units, whether we're talking about African American, African studies, Chicano studies, American Indian studies, Asian American studies, are all understaffed, underfinanced, under-resourced, et cetera. And the posture of the central administration these days is very nebulous for a variety of reasons, in part because the administration is caught in the grips of a changing social contract between the public at large and our public educational institutions, right? Which is where, again, that original land grant mission is in part implicated, and the pull away from the public for a variety of reasons from it, where it needs in part to be addressed.
You lack faculty allies today in the same way you lacked faculty allies in the 60s. Because one thing you impressed upon me was there really wasn't faculty that helped you in this. This was really bottom up. This was really the students talking, and there were very few, there were people that were sympathetic, but you were pretty much on your own.
There were sympathetic individual faculty members, so forth, but not in an organized way, not representing the faculty in any kind of corporate sense, All right. And, you know, it's a somewhat different situation today, in part because of the changing demography of the faculty and so forth. But faculty of color are still dramatically underrepresented here. And there are a number of things that are at work on this campus now that have changed the landscape in terms of student activism. Many of the students in AAAC were here in the General College, all right, which had been an open admissions college created during the Depression to offer alternative ways of entering higher education. The General College was abolished a few years after a tremendous fight, all right, in which the African American community, Chicano community, the American Indian community, the underprivileged white community all were engaged in battle over it. Part of the reason the General College was lost was not because it was in financial distress, because it wasn't. All right, the black dean then, Dr. David Taylor, who himself was a strong, committed, local Minnesota product of this institution, fought tooth and nail to keep the General College afloat. But those forces that I alluded to earlier on, who believed that the General College did not fit an elite vision of this institution, ultimately won. And you know, that kind of battle is ongoing. That kind of battle is ongoing.
That's one of the reasons I was trying to introduce the whole understanding is that we need to listen to what's going on in society today. It's not possible for us, each generation, to continue to pass down the strategy of the previous generation. The system has to be understood. What's going on, what works and what doesn't. And I think as a society, we're not good at evaluating. We're good at acting, stopping. Acting, stopping. And we don't really assess, have we made any changes? Are things different? Or are we still just doing things, getting the same results, calling it something else? And I just feel so strongly that if we don't, as an institution, and I think, yes, there is an anticipated, expected role of a system of higher education and information. It can be applied equally to what the struggles are. But we continue to try to treat the activist movement and activities as something outside of us. And I just think that has to be re-examined and appreciated. If we're going to make a change that's going to make a difference, and we've got to assess that. We're not good at analyzing. We like to keep on keeping on, as my father would say.
Ramona.
Well, I think that professors, instructors, educators, let's call ourselves educators, we have a responsibility to really, what I just shared, what is knowledge? Where did I gain my knowledge? I gained my knowledge from the activism that I was involved in at the university. I gained my respect for human dignity. I gained collaboration skills. I gained working together with my brothers and sisters. I gained all that knowledge from my involvement, from my engagement. And so this is the thing, is that now I'm at this end, you know, we're talking about close to 50 years ago, and we're talking about what is success, okay? And so you think, all of us, we were willing to go to jail. we were willing to do this for the generation that came behind us. We knew we had to do something not for ourselves, it was for the benefits of our own children. And that's what my sister says here. And yet here we were, and we fought so hard, and we sacrificed, and we were willing to go to jail. And And yet we're living in the times we're living today. It's hard for us to believe. It's scary for me, for my grandchildren. I'm not even talking about my children anymore. I'm talking about my 14 grandchildren. And so what do you all, the professors, say to those? How do you measure success? What is success? Did I go out and did I have offers to make lots of money? Of course I did. But what was most important to me was social justice, was being that agent of change. What's most important, what are we teaching? What are we teaching? What are we instructing? What are we educating our future? And so some measure success, and yet, to my grandchildren, I want them to have a formal education. I want them to have access. I want them to be the lawyers, to be what they have to be. But they have to have some sort of form of social justice. Otherwise, you know what? You're not complete. I don't know. I don't know how you measure success then.
I want to.
I contend that there may be more activism now than there were in the 60s in terms of people doing different things. The difference is there was a focus. The civil rights movement was a kind of incubator for other movements, and they were all big movements. There was more concentration of people doing activism, but there may not be more people in actual numbers. People doing all kind of little things, but don't impact. It has no impact. They don't have any reference point. They don't have the values that you alluded to. Altruism is missing. You know, the whole thing of selflessness, and that was very powerful during the 60s. There were people who, I remember down in the height of the Mississippi Madness when they were killing people and Serna Goodman, Cheney, and so forth. They asked one white guy from New York, that just couldn't be said today. He's from New York, and the guy, you know, what are you doing down here? He said, I'm here for social justice, promoting democracy. He said, and you know, you're here for the black people? He said, no, really, I'm here for myself. I want to live in a free country, an open country. This is for me. Black people might have responded, perked it, but I want a country where a human being can be a human being. That's what he said from New York. It's not just where they might have inspired me, but this is not why I'm here. I'm here for the fundamental question of human dignity. That's why I'm here, and I'm scared as hell, but I'm still going to stay here. You're not going to run me out. But it's not just for black people. It's for me. I want a better America.
I think that's a very appropriate place for us to bring this roundtable to a close. And I want to thank, again, Ramona de Rosales, Professor Mahmoud El-Kati, and Dr. Josie Johnson for their participation in this roundtable. I want to thank all of you for taking time out of your day and braving the elements outside to share this time with us. I want to encourage you to attend the other events that are part of the celebration of the 150th anniversary of the College of Liberal Arts. Thank you and have a good day.